Here's what we're talking about today. The largest Russian attack on Ukrainian cities. 1 million people without electricity and water. The armed forces are striking back. Ukrainian troops carried out a successful special operation in the Kharkiv region. The Russians are surrounded. Ukrainians continue to destroy Russian ships. Effective sanctions against Russia's shadow fleet. Trump has decided to lift sanctions on Belarus. All this and more, right now. Hello, I'm Karina Kleishon. This is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, leave a like, and let's get to the news. Yesterday, Russia attacked the Ukrainian city of Odessa. It was the largest attack on the city since the start of the full-scale war. For the first time since the invasion began, Russia attacked Odessa with Kinzhal missiles. Iskander missiles and Shahed-type drones also struck the city. Of course, the Russians targeted civilians. Dozens of buildings have been destroyed. The Russians also deliberately targeted the energy infrastructure. Currently, more than 1 million residents of the city are without electricity and water. Odessa has turned into darkness as if from a movie. But unfortunately, this is the reality that Putin is creating in Ukrainian cities. Rescuers are still clearing the rubble and extinguishing fires throughout the city. However, Ukraine also knows how to strike back. Putin has disgraced himself before the whole world. The Russians are surrounded. The northwestern part of Kupiansk is under Ukrainian control. Yesterday, the defense forces reported a lightning-fast counterattack in the Kharkiv region. More details about this successful operation in the following report.
Another victorious triumph for Putin, of course, only in words.
Comrades, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are steadfastly holding the initiative and continue to carry out the so-called special military operation.
Since the beginning of December, the thieves have been claiming the complete capture of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region and the alleged encirclement of 15 battalions of Ukraine's defense forces in the city. This is noted by the Ukrainian Center for Countering
Disinformation, which is often deliberately misleading and deceptive information, is being actively spread by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This pervasive and harmful disinformation campaign is, at the very least, unequivocally one of the strategic initiatives orchestrated by Vladimir Putin, who is also directly and actively participating in such a sophisticated and extensive information psychological operation designed to manipulate public perception and sow discord. And accordingly, we see that even some Western media are getting involved, reporting on the complete encirclement of Kupiansk, on its total capture. Moreover, this story is quite authoritative.
Russian claims. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, responded by adding that Ukrainian forces managed to significantly improve their tactical position directly in Kupiansk.
It is obvious that the Russians have not managed to achieve such significant successes on the battlefield. Despite the fierce fighting, despite the fact that the grouping of Russian troops operating from the Severoslobozhansky direction all the way to the Crimean front, the intensity of combat operations today is extremely high. However, even when concentrating large forces on the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd direction and on our other hotspots at the front, including the Kupiansk direction, they are not achieving success. Of course, they need to show that all these efforts by Russian troops are firstly achieving results, that the results are positive, and that the advance is rapid. And this information needs to be conveyed to our European partners as much as possible to show them Ukraine's weakness and accordingly the strength of the Russian army.
According to the operational situation as of the morning of December 10th on the Kupiansk direction, our brave and resilient defenders successfully and decisively stopped the enemy's aggressive assault actions in the direction of Petropavlivka, preventing any further advance.
And Bohuslavka, a significant and historically rich location that plays a crucial role in the ongoing narrative, known for its unique characteristics and its profound impact on the surrounding region, making it an essential point of interest to consider. A counter-sabotage operation is underway, meaning we are essentially talking about clearing certain sectors of the city of Kupiansk from Russian troops in order to try to push the Russians completely outside the city limits.
However, the Russians, those formidable and determined forces who had been meticulously planning their next strategic move, were now poised to execute their operation.
Russian forces relentlessly continue to shell the vulnerable Kupiansk area with devastating guided bombs causing widespread destruction and fear. Meanwhile, courageous Ukrainian rescuers are tirelessly working to evacuate the terrified local population, often under intense and perilous fire, risking their own lives to save others. We have tragically witnessed how this brutal scenario invariably ends, particularly in Kupiansk itself, where the consequences of such relentless aggression have been devastatingly clear and profoundly impactful on the lives of its residents. You remember the situation when the Russians actively used civilian clothing to disguise themselves, infiltrate the city center, carry out their so-called flash mobs, these so-called flag-raising events, and most importantly, try to penetrate further into our positions.
Those who still dare to stay in the city are openly unwelcoming to the occupiers and give them a direct response.
Tell all of them to leave immediately, understood? And don't come back ever again.
The man, without any fear, tells the occupiers who have slipped into his building to mind their own Ukraine. He also recalls how Ukrainian soldiers shared their food with him.
Meanwhile, the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine reported the destruction of a Russian military transport aircraft and 26 and 2 of Russia's newest radar stations in temporarily occupied Crimea. But it's not just about the aircraft. The naval battle, it seems, is ongoing. In the Caspian Sea, 2 Russian ships transporting weapons were hit. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, together with the partisan movement Black Spark, carried out an operation striking 2 Russian vessels, the Composer Rachmaninov and the Askar Sarija. These ships were used by Russia to transport weapons and equipment and were under US sanctions. Interestingly, as The Atlantic reports, the US has given Ukraine an unofficial green light to strike the Russian shadow fleet. According to journalists, Trump at times even approved the sharing of intelligence for such strikes. Just in the past few weeks, Ukraine has blown up at least 5 more of these tankers. Moscow has already called this piracy and announced retaliatory strikes. And it seems that one of these strikes happened yesterday in Odessa. In the port of Chornomorsk, a vessel was hit by 2 Iskander-E missiles. But it was a civilian vessel. And there's one more thing. It was a Turkish ship traveling from the Turkish port of Karasu to Romania. And Erdogan is already furious. He called on Putin to agree to a limited ceasefire in Ukraine so that both sides would stop striking energy infrastructure and ports. Let me remind you, earlier he stated that Russia's war against Ukraine has reached a point where it clearly threatens navigational safety in the Black Sea. Now he will demand even more from Putin. Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad are 2 settlements that have become symbols of the Ukrainian army's resilience. It is there that a hellish battle is currently taking place. Our next report is about what is happening in these cities at this very moment. The Russians are storming Pokrovsk with columns of equipment. Trying to take advantage of the bad weather conditions, the occupiers launched an assault using armored vehicles, cars, and motorcycles. The Ukrainian armed forces, who were already expecting the Russian advance, eliminated the enemy almost immediately. Ukrainian defenders report that the work of destroying enemy equipment and personnel continues. Various components of the defense forces, including the Air Assault Forces Group, are being involved in the defense of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Assault, which is a violent attack, either physical or verbal, causing harm or injury to an individual.
Units of the State Border Guard Service, SBS, the Special Operations Forces, SSO, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, the National Guard of Ukraine, and the National Police Force, all working together to ensure security and defense.
Logistics for the Ukrainian armed forces remains complicated. To strengthen our supply capabilities, an operation is underway to expand logistical corridors in the city of Suputnik, Pokrovsk, and Myrnohrad.
The occupiers' efforts are attempts to break through to Kharkiv, which is a key logistical component for the Ukrainian armed forces. In the Pokrovsk direction, the occupiers are not giving up attempts to operationally encircle the Ukrainian armed forces in the Mirnohrad area. The main goal of the occupying forces, once again, is to establish direct physical control over the locations of the Ukrainian armed forces.
In order to take Pokrovsk, the Russian command has transferred operational reserves there, which are also being ground down in unsuccessful attempts to capture the city. Realizing this, Russian soldiers, fearing redeployment to the Pokrovsk direction, have begun to be hospitalized en masse. This was reported by the partisan movement Atesh. According to the medical unit, the number of requests from the occupiers has already exceeded the norm. Soldiers are heading to the hospital in entire groups. They are using old injuries, questionable diagnoses, and any excuse to avoid rotation. The fall of Pokrovsk will not lead to the collapse of Ukraine's defense, but it will weaken Kyiv at a sensitive moment in negotiations to end the war under the auspices of the United States, according to
Reuters is a global news agency providing comprehensive and timely news and information to media outlets and professionals worldwide. In the territory of Donetsk region under its control, the Russian Federation is holding on to these areas by military means. Russian special services are preparing a series of provocations both in Pokrovska and in the Pokrovsk direction, with the aim of accusing the Ukrainian defense forces of using prohibited chemical poisonous substances.
no matter what anyone says, for more than a year now, the defense forces have continued to actively defend in the Pokrovsk direction, currently controlling 40% of the city, where the Ukrainian flag is raised in the center. And the United States has decided to establish relations with Lukashenko. As stated by Trump's special representative Cole, the United States is lifting sanctions on Belarusian potash. He added that as relations between the two countries normalize, more and more sanctions will be lifted. Potash is Belarus's main export. Before the sanctions, it brought the country billions of dollars a year. Lukashenko also noted that Belarus and the United States have many issues that require discussion. Earlier, information appeared that more than 150 Belarusian political prisoners would be released in the near future.
In the United States, the political pendulum has swung once again. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, thank you, he decided to shake up the information space. He introduced a bill for the United States to withdraw from NATO. He says the alliance is a relic of the Cold War and that money should be spent not on allies but on our own borders. What is behind this initiative, and what are the chances that it will become a reality? We will tell you more about this in the report. A member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Republican Thomas Massie. He introduced a bill for the United States to withdraw from NATO. This became known from the text of the bill, which Massie published on the social network X.
NATO is a relic of the Cold War. The United States should withdraw from NATO and use that money to defend our own country, not socialist countries. Today, I introduce Bill H.R. 65.
In his bill, Massie stated that NATO was created to counter the Soviet Union, which collapsed more than 30 years ago.
Since then, U.S. participation has cost taxpayers trillions of dollars and still carries the risk of drawing the United States into foreign wars.
This bill requires President Donald Trump to officially notify NATO of the withdrawal, no later than 30 days after the law comes into effect. Furthermore, the document states that the bloc's original Cold War-era purpose no longer aligns with the national interests of the United States. The bill stipulates that the European members of NATO possess sufficient economic and military capacity to provide for their own defense. And it prevents the use of American taxpayers' money to fund the organization's joint budgets. But to fully understand such a statement from this Republican, you first need to know who Thomas Massie is.
This congressman is a rather specific representative from the Republican Party community, which is associated with the MAGA movement. He is an isolationist and advocates for minimizing government interference in people's lives. And generally, he believes that the United States should minimize its involvement in any foreign policy activities.
Political scientist Petro Olishchuk is convinced that it cannot be said that this opinion and such a loud statement by Massie can be considered mainstream in the United States.
However, in the context of the White House introducing a new version of the U.S. foreign policy strategy, which has sparked heated debate not only in the U.S. but also around the world, he is probably trying to somehow use this trend to implement his own vision for the future of the United States.
Reuters, citing sources, reports that last week, a meeting took place in Washington between Pentagon officials overseeing NATO policy and several European delegations. During the negotiations, Washington did not announce any plans to leave the alliance, but wants Europe to take on the majority of NATO's conventional defense capabilities. From intelligence to missiles, the deadline set by the Americans is 2027.
Shifting this burden from the US to the European members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will fundamentally change things, including how the United States, one of the founders of the post-war alliance, cooperates with its most important military partners.
Moreover, according to media reports, at the meeting, Pentagon representatives noted that Washington is still not satisfied with the steps Europe has taken to strengthen its defense capabilities after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
With Trump's arrival, isolationist sentiments are growing stronger. The United States constantly declares that they are not interested in defending Europe in any way, that Europe should defend itself, and that their priorities lie in the Pacific region.
The media report that American officials have informed their colleagues that if Europe does not meet the requirements by 2027, the US may withdraw from certain NATO defense coordination mechanisms.
What is special about this strategy? Although the strategy does not explicitly call for the United States to leave NATO, it clearly states that the US will reduce its participation in NATO programs and that Europeans themselves must take responsibility for their own defense. Overall, the defense of Europe is not really considered an issue for the United States.
At the same time, several European officials have stated that the 2027 deadline is unrealistic. Regardless of how Washington assesses the progress, Europe needs more than just money. It also needs the political will to replace certain US capabilities in the short term.
We have made it clear that it is necessary for Europeans to take the lead, of course, in the defense of Europe. We strive to work through NATO coordination mechanisms to strengthen the alliance and ensure its long-term viability, as European allies increasingly take on responsibility for conventional deterrence and defense in Europe.
But in any case, one thing is clear. There are quite a few questions piling up for NATO. And the Americans themselves have made it clear, things will not be as they were before.
While Congress is not yet ready to vote for the US to leave NATO, this is nevertheless an indicator of a trend that is being observed in American politics. For now, it seems the United States will not be leaving NATO. But for now, the trend is that NATO is becoming an increasingly elusive structure, and the question arises, will the US actually defend its NATO allies? So far, in the context of Trump's actions, all of this looks very, very strange.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders, both men and women. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. See you next time.